Commander Vextel stretched his forearms and felt the familiar ache in his crystalline joints. 47 star systems. 47 victories. The scars on his blue-black exoskeleton told stories of plasma burns from the siege of Kepler 442, blade marks from the ground assault on Proxima Station, and the distinctive spiderweb crack across his chest plate from when a human-made missile had nearly ended his career at the Battle of Wolf 359. That last scar always made him chuckle. Humans, such primitive, emotional creatures. Yet here he was, 3 cycles later, assigned by the Galactic Council to evaluate their military potential for Alliance membership. The irony wasn't lost on him. His flagship, the Dominion's Edge, hung in space like a work of art. Its hull curved and flowed like liquid metal, every surface designed for both beauty and function. Weapon ports were hidden behind elegant panels, and the ship's bioluminescent navigation strips pulsed with a soft amber glow. This was what a proper warship should look like, deadly and magnificent. The human fleet that awaited him at the rendezvous coordinates was ... disappointing. Their ships looked like flying warehouses. Flat, angular, covered in antennas and sensor. Arrays that stuck out at odd angles. No grace, no elegance. It's just brutal functionality. "Commander, the human fleet is hailing us," reported his communications officer. A young hegemony recruit whose enthusiasm reminded Vextel of his own early days in the fleet. On screen, Vextel commanded, settling into his command throne. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a human face. The creature was smaller than Vextel had expected, with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Welcome to the Sol Defense Grid, Commander Vextel," the human said in accented galactic standard. "I'm Captain Kim Tae-hein of the UES Incheon. We're honored to participate in these joint exercises." Vextel's mandibles clicked in what his species considered polite acknowledgement, though he knew it sounded dismissive to other races. "Indeed, Captain. I am here to evaluate your fleet's capabilities for a potential council membership." "To us. Proceed with the assessment. Try not to embarrass yourselves too badly." If the human took offense, he didn't show it. Instead, Kim Tae-han simply nodded. "Understood, Commander. We'll do our best to meet your expectations." The war games began with basic formation flying. Vextel watched through his tactical display. As the human ships moved into standard defensive positions, their movements were textbook perfect, not brilliant but competent. The kind of precision that came from drilling the same maneuvers over and over until they became second nature. Lieutenant Commander Park So-young commanded a squadron of destroyers that maintained perfect spacing and timing. Her ships moved like a school of fish, each one responding to the other's movements with practiced ease. When the exercise called for a defensive screen, her destroyers slipped into position with mechanical precision. Major Lee Min-ho's fighter wing performed even better. His pilots executed attack runs that Vextel had seen 1,000 times before in military academies across the galaxy. Clean, efficient, and utterly predictable. The kind of tactics that worked well against pirates and raiders, but would crumble against a real military force? "Adequate," Vextel murmured to his tactical officer. "They follow orders well. Basic understanding of fleet coordination. Suitable for patrol duties or convoy escort." The human ships continued their maneuvers for another hour. They demonstrated competence in defensive formations, supply line protection, and even showed some skill in coordinated attacks. But there was nothing that impressed Vextel, nothing that suggested these humans belonged in the same league as the hegemony fleet, or the other major powers of the galaxy. He was beginning to compose his preliminary report when the proximity alarms began. Screaming, contact, multiple contacts, dropping out of hyperspace. His sensor officer called out, her voice tight with sudden tension. "Ravager-class ships bearing 27 Mark IV. They're moving to intercept." Vextel's eyes widened. Ravagers were the most feared pirates in this sector of the galaxy. Their ships were built for speed and destruction, crewed by the worst scum the galaxy had to offer. What were they doing in a military exercise zone? All units, Captain Kim Tae-hein's voice crackled over the communication channels. "This is no longer a drill. We have hostile contacts. Weapons free. Repeat, weapons free. Protect the civilian transports at all costs. Vextall felt a familiar thrill run through his exoskeleton. Real combat. This would be perfect. He could demonstrate proper military doctrine to these humans while simultaneously eliminating a pirate threat. 2 objectives accomplished with 1. Engagement. Battle stations, commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge. Prepare for combat formation Theta-7. Will show these primitives how real warriors fight. His crew moved with the fluid efficiency of veterans. Weapon systems came online with barely a sound, their bioneural networks interfacing seamlessly with the ship's consciousness. The Dominion's Edge was more than just a warship. It was a living extension of Vextall's will, responding to his thoughts as quickly as his own body. The human fleet was also preparing for battle, but their movements seemed chaotic compared to the elegant precision of hegemony doctrine. Ships broke formation, scattered in what appeared to be random directions. Some accelerated toward the enemy. Others seemed to be fleeing. It looked like panic. Pathetic, Vextall muttered, watching the tactical display. They're going to get themselves killed.
What?
But something nagged at him. Captain Kim Tae-hein hadn't seemed like the type to panic. Those calm, assessing eyes had suggested a mind that remained clear under pressure. Why were his ships behaving like frightened animals? The answer would come soon enough. The Ravager fleet was closing fast, their dark ships bristling with weapons. In minutes, Vextall would see exactly what humanity was capable of when the stakes were real. He just had no idea that everything he thought he knew about warfare was about to be turned upside down. The Ravager fleet materialized out of hyperspace like ghosts emerging from a nightmare. 12 massive heavy cruisers hung in the void, their black hulls scarred from countless battles. Each ship bristled with weapon turrets that glowed with barely contained energy. Behind them came the fighters' sleek, predatory craft that moved like hunting wolves, their engines leaving trails of crimson exhaust. Vextall's tactical computer immediately began analyzing the enemy formation. Perfect spacing, optimal firing angles, textbook approach vectors. These weren't common pirates. They were professionals. The kind of raiders who had turned piracy into an art form. Impressive, he admitted to his tactical officer. They know what they're doing, but so do we. His fingers danced across the holographic controls, pulling up formation Theta-7. It was a classic hegemony battle formation. His heaviest ships would form the center line. With lighter vessels providing flanking support, the human fleet would maintain a defensive screen while his superior firepower dealt with the threat. Human vessels maintain defensive screen while my ships engage, he broadcast on the command frequency. Follow standard protocol 7 Alpha. Hold position and provide covering fire. But something was wrong. Instead of moving into the assigned positions, the human ships began scattering in all directions. Vextall watched in growing alarm as their neat formations dissolved into what looked like complete chaos. Captain Tae-hin returned to formation immediately. He barked into his communicator. "You're exposing our flanks." The human captain's voice came back steady and calm. "Negative. Commander, we're going to try something different." Different was putting it mildly. Lieutenant Commander Park So-young's destroyer suddenly dove straight down, disappearing beneath the plane of battle. Her movement was so sudden and unexpected that Vextall's tactical computer couldn't even plot her new course. At the same time, Major Lee Min-ho's fighter wing exploded outward like a burst firework, splitting into 3 separate groups that accelerated in seemingly random directions. "What are they doing?" Vextall's navigation officer asked, his voice tight with confusion. "They're going to get themselves killed." The Ravager fleet responded to the human movement by tightening their own formation. Their commander had probably seen similar panicked responses before, enemy fleets breaking apart under pressure, each ship trying to save itself. The pirates began adjusting their approach, clearly planning to pick off the scattered human vessels one by one. That's when the impossible happened. Park So-young's destroyer came rocketing up from below the battle plane, appearing directly under the Ravager flagship like a predator striking from deep water. Her railguns opened fire at point-blank range, hypervelocity rounds punching through the enemy ship's lighter bottom armor like it was made of paper. Explosions bloomed along the flagship's hull as critical systems were destroyed. At the same moment, Lee Min-ho's three fighter groups struck from completely different angles. The first group dove at the enemy from above, their missiles creating a wall of fire that forced the Ravager fighters to break formation. The second group came in from the left, targeting the enemy's weapon systems with surgical precision. The third group attacked from the right, their laser cannons cutting through armor plating like hot knives through butter. Possible Vextal whispered, watching his tactical display struggle to track the human movements. How are they coordinating this? The answer came when he accidentally tapped into the human communication channel. Instead of the rigid military protocols he was used to, he heard something that made his blood freeze. "Park, you beautiful maniac. That was perfect timing." Lee Min-ho's voice crackled over the com. "Thanks, but I'm not done yet," Park replied, her destroyer already swinging around for another attack run. "Choi, you see that opening on the cruiser's port side?" "I see it," came another voice. Going in hot, they were improvising.
Aye.
Every move, every attack, every defensive maneuver was being created on the spot. No predetermined battle plans, no computer calculations, just pure human instinct and battlefield awareness. A pilot named Choi Sung-woo demonstrated this perfectly. His fighter had taken heavy damage from enemy fire, its left wing trailing debris and sparks. By all logic, he should have retreated for repairs. Instead, he accelerated directly toward a damaged Ravager cruiser, using his ship's momentum to ram through the enemy's weakened armor. His fighter's hull somehow held together just long enough for him to punch through to the other side. The explosion of the enemy ship lighting up space behind him. "Did you see that?" Vextal's weapons officer gasped. He used his own ship as a missile, but the humans weren't finished. As the battle continued, Vextal watched them perform maneuvers that violated every principle of space combat he had ever learned. They used debris as shields, turned damaged systems into weapons, and coordinated attacks with a precision that seemed almost telepathic. The most shocking moment came when Austin Choi Du-haeon found his heavy cruiser surrounded by 3 Ravager vessels. His ship was heavily damaged, life support failing, and his weapons were operating at less than 30% capacity. Any reasonable commander would have surrendered or attempted to retreat. Instead, Choi Du-haeon smiled. "All hands, prepare for ramming speed." His voice came over the com, steady and determined. "We're going to show these pirates what happens when you threaten human space." "Sir, that's suicide," his first officer protested. "No," Choi replied, his engines already beginning to overload. "That's for Earth and all her children." The human cruiser accelerated directly toward the largest Ravager dreadnought, its hull glowing from the strain of its overloaded engines. The enemy ship tried to maneuver away, but it was too late. The collision was catastrophic. Both ships disappeared in a ball of plasma that briefly outshone the local sun. But even in death, Choi Du-haeon had achieved something remarkable. His sacrifice had taken out the enemy's command ship and created a gap in their formation that the other human vessels immediately exploited. Within minutes, the remaining Ravager ships were either destroyed or fleeing into hyperspace. The battle was over, and the humans had won a complete victory. Vextal sat in his command chair, staring at his tactical display in stunned silence. His after-action computer was struggling to compile a coherent report. The human tactics had been so unorthodox that the system couldn't even categorize them properly. "Commander," his tactical officer asked quietly, "your assessment?" Vextal was quiet for a long moment. Everything he thought he knew about warfare had just been challenged. The humans had fought with a creativity and adaptability that he had never seen before. They had turned chaos into victory, weakness into strength, and desperation into triumph. "I need to revise my initial report," he said finally. "These humans, they're not like any warriors I've encountered before." As he watched the human fleet regrouping, tending to their wounded and securing the battlefield, Vextal realized that his evaluation of humanity's military potential had been completely wrong. They weren't just competent, they were revolutionary. And that realization both thrilled and terrified him. The emergency beacon cut through the peaceful silence of the Sol system like a scream in the night. Bextel was reviewing his battle reports when the Priority 1 alert flashed across every screen on his ship. The message was brief, but its contents made his crystalline blood run cold. New Sol colony under massive attack. Orbital bombardment. In progress, civilian casualties mounting. Request immediate assistance. This is not a drill. New Sol was humanity's crown jewel, a thriving colony world with over 50 million inhabitants. It was home to families, children, artists, and dreamers. The kind of place that represented everything the Galactic Council claimed to protect. Vextel expected Captain Tehayan to follow standard evacuation protocols, call for reinforcements, evacuate non-essential personnel, maybe attempt a negotiated withdrawal. That's what any reasonable commander would do when facing overwhelming odds. But when Tehayan entered the command center, Vextel saw something that made his exoskeleton shiver. The polite, respectful officer from the war games was gone. In his place stood something that looked barely human. Tehayan's eyes burned with an intensity that reminded Vextel of the predators from his homeworld. It's a kind that would tear through entire herds to protect their young. All units, all units. Tehayan's voice carried across the fleet communication channels with deadly calm. This is not a drill. They're killing our people. It's time to show them what that means. The transformation that followed was unlike anything Vextel had ever witnessed. The human fleet began changing before his eyes, and not just in formation or tactics. The very nature of what constituted a warship seemed to shift. Lieutenant Commander Park So-young appeared on the tactical display with 3 additional vessels that hadn't been there an hour ago. When Vextel sensors analyzed them, he discovered they were civilian cargo haulers that had been hastily converted into missile platforms. Welding marks were still hot on their hulls where weapon systems had been bolted into place. "Park, what are those ships?" Vextel asked over the comm. "Freighters," she replied without hesitation. "The Sol Express, Busan Trader, and Asterisk Lucky, Dragon Asterisk. Their crews volunteered to help. We've loaded them with every missile we could find." Major Lee Minho's fighter wing had nearly doubled in size. But when Vextel looked closer, he realized half the ships weren't military fighters at all. There were racing ships with their sleek curves and overcharged engines. Mining craft with industrial cutting lasers hastily reconfigured as weapons. Even a few luxury yachts whose owners had apparently decided to join the fight. "This is insane," Vextel muttered to his tactical officer. "They're bringing civilians into combat." But the madness was just beginning. Kim Dong-soo, the engine's cook, had somehow acquired a supply shuttle and was busy welding plasma rifles to its cargo bay doors. When asked what he was doing, the grizzled veteran simply grinned and said, "Been waiting 20 years for another chance to kill pirates." Even the civilian population was getting involved. Vextel watched in amazement as dock workers loaded ammunition. Engineers performed emergency repairs, and even children helped carry supplies. The entire human fleet had transformed into something that was part military unit, part civilian militia, and part something else entirely. "This is madness," Vextel observed as they prepared to jump to hyperspace. "You're bringing civilians into combat." Captain Tehayan turned to face him, and Vextel saw something in those human eyes that made him take a step back. It wasn't anger or fear, it was something far more primal and terrifying. "No, Commander," Tehan said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "We're bringing war to the enemy." The jump to hyperspace seemed to last forever. The transit Vextel watched the humans make final preparations. They weren't following any military manual or tactical doctrine. Instead, they were improvising solutions with a creativity that bordered on the supernatural. A civilian engineer named Yoon Haijin had figured out how to turn mining charges into ship-to-ship torpedoes. Teenage pilot named Baek Min-jun was giving fighter tactics lessons to yacht owners over the comm system. Even the ship's doctor, Lee Sang-ho, was preparing to use medical drones as reconnaissance units when they dropped out of hyperspace above New Sol. The scope of the enemy force hit Vextel like a physical blow. Over 100 ships filled the Space around the colony world, their dark holes blocking out the stars. Several massive dreadnoughts were conducting systematic orbital bombardment, their energy beams carving scars across the planet's surface. The human fleet was outnumbered, 5-1. By every tactical principle Vextal knew, they should have immediately retreated or attempted to negotiate. Instead, they attacked. What followed wasn't warfare as Vextal understood it. It was something far more primitive and infinitely more terrifying. The humans didn't form battle lines or execute coordinated maneuvers. They swarmed like angry insects, coming from every conceivable angle with a fury that defied description. Commander Beijing Wu's engineering ship, the Hammer of Progress, accelerated directly toward the enemy formation. His vessel wasn't designed for combat. It was built for construction work and deep space repairs. But Bei had turned it into a battering ram, reinforcing the hull with spare armor plating and overloading the engines beyond safe parameters. Ginwu, what are you doing? Park Soyoung called over the cum. Something stupid, he replied with a laugh. Tell my wife I love her. The Hammer of Progress punched through the enemy formation like a cannonball through paper. Bei held his course until he was surrounded by enemy ships, then triggered his self-destruct sequence. The explosion took out 3 pirate cruisers and scattered their formation. Like leaves in a hurricane, pilot Oh Sung-min's fighter had taken heavy damage early in the battle, its engines leaking plasma and its weapon systems offline. Any reasonable pilot would have ejected or attempted to land on a friendly ship. Instead, Oh turned his damaged fighter into a weapon. Watch this, he said over the cum, his voice tight with concentration. I'm going to thread the needle. He accelerated toward a massive enemy cruiser, his damaged engines trailing fire and debris. At the last second, he ejected from his fighter and watched as his ship punched through the enemy vessel's hull. The explosion that followed gutted the cruiser from the inside out. Beautiful, Park, Soyoung whispered, watching the enemy ship break apart. Absolutely beautiful. The battle continued with the humans pulling off impossible maneuvers and improvised attacks that no tactical computer could have predicted. They used asteroids as shields, turned debris into weapons, and coordinated attacks with a precision that seemed almost telepathic. Commander, they're not following any tactical doctrine, Vextal's tactical officer reported, his voice rising with panic. How are we supposed to predict their movements? Vextal watched the chaos unfold on his tactical display, finally understanding what he was witnessing. The humans weren't following doctrine because they didn't have one. They were creating their tactics in real time, adapting to each moment with a fluidity that his military mind could barely comprehend. That's because they don't have one, he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. Right there, making it up as they go. Somehow, impossibly, it was working. The space around New Seoul had become a graveyard of twisted metal and burning plasma. Vextal watched from his command throne as the battle raged with an intensity that made his previous 47 campaigns seem like training exercises. But it wasn't the scale of the fighting that left him speechless. It was the way the humans fought. Major Lee Minho's fighter screamed past Vextal's viewport, its hull scarred by laser fire and trailing sparks from damaged systems. His enhanced optics, Vextal could see into the cockpit where Lee was coordinating a complex fighter assault. The human's left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken from shrapnel that had punched through his canopy. Blood stained his flight suit, and his face was pale from blood loss. Yet Lee continued to bark orders over the cum while simultaneously executing barrel rolls that would have challenged a healthy pilot. His squadron followed his lead, weaving between enemy fire with precision that defied explanation. Minho, you need medical attention. Park Soyoung's voice crackled over the cum. Get back to the engine now. Negatively replied, his voice steady despite the obvious pain. Still got work to do. Medical attention comes after we finish this. Vextal's mandibles clicked in disbelief. In hegemony doctrine, wounded personnel were immediately evacuated to preserve their long-term effectiveness. But Lee was treating his injuries like a minor inconvenience, continuing to fight at peak efficiency while his body should have been shutting down from trauma. Lieutenant Commander Park Soyoung's destroyer provided an even more shocking example. The Soul Guardian had taken catastrophic damage. Half its weapon systems were offline. 3 decks were venting atmosphere into space, and its main engine was operating at barely 30% capacity. The ship looked like it had been through a meat grinder. Any reasonable commander would have withdrawn for emergency repairs. Instead, Park was using her crippled vessel as a battering ram, accelerating toward smaller enemy ships and using her exposed superstructure as a weapon. Her crew worked frantically to maintain life support while she turned their dying ship into an instrument of destruction. "Guardian, you're breaking apart," came a panicked voice over the comm. "Withdraw immediately." "Not yet," Park replied calmly. As she lined up another ramming attack, this old girl's got one more fight in her. Vextal watched in amazement as the human destroyer struck an enemy corvette, the impact crushing both vessels' hulls. Somehow, the Soul Guardian held together long enough for Park to extract her ship and prepare for another attack. "How are they still fighting?" Vextal's communication officer asked, his voice filled with awe and terror. "They're casualties. Should have forced a withdrawal hours ago." The answer came from an unexpected source. Sergeant Yu Jae-sung was leading a boarding party onto an enemy heavy cruiser. Vextal had been monitoring the operation through intercepted communications, and the situation was desperate. Yu's entire squad was wounded, their equipment was failing, and they were outnumbered 10-1 by enemy pirates. The smart move would have been to retreat and regroup. Instead, Yu's voice came over the comm with deadly calm as explosions echoed in the background. "Control, this is boarding Team Alpha. We've secured the engine room, but we're taking heavy fire. Enemy forces are converging on our position." "Can you hold?" came the reply. Yu's laughter was cold and hard. "We're not trapped in here with them. We're trapped in here with us." What followed was a masterclass in human warfare. Yu's team didn't just defend their position, they went hunting. Using their knowledge of ship layouts and improvised weapons, they turned the enemy cruiser into a death trap. Within an hour, the pirates were fleeing their own ship while the humans took control of the bridge. But the most terrifying moment came when Captain Taehyun's flagship found itself surrounded by 3 enemy dreadnoughts. These weren't ordinary pirate vessels. They were military-grade warships with enough firepower to level a city. The Inchin was trapped, outgunned, and facing certain destruction. Vextal prepared to witness a heroic last stand. Instead, Taehyun smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the expression of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Engineering overload the main reactor. Taehyun ordered with the same calm tone he might use to order coffee. Navigation, plot a ramming. Of course, for the center ship. All hands, prepare for close-quarters combat. His first officer, Commander Nam Jae-hoon, stared at him in shock. "Sir, that's suicide. Can't survive a reactor overload at that range." "No," Taehyun replied, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. "That's human." The Inchin's reactor began to redline as the ship accelerated toward the enemy formation. Energy readings spiked beyond safe parameters, while the hull groaned under the stress. But just as the ship reached critical velocity, Taehyun triggered the emergency evacuation pods. Dozens of escape pods launched from the flagship, but they weren't fleeing to safety. Instead, they were aimed directly at the enemy dreadnoughts like living missiles. Each pod contained a full squad of Marines armed with boarding equipment and an unshakable determination to continue the fight. The explosion that followed when the engine struck the enemy formation was visible from 3 star systems away. 2 dreadnoughts were completely destroyed, while the third was left crippled and burning. But the real shock came when Vextal's sensors detected human life signs aboard the damaged enemy vessel. The Marines from the escape pods had survived the impact and were already fighting their way through the enemy ship. Within minutes, they had seized control of the bridge and were turning the dreadnought's weapons against the rest of the pirate fleet. "Impossible," Vextal whispered, watching human crew members operate enemy weapon systems with terrifying efficiency. "They're using the enemy's own ship against them." Captain Taehyun's voice came over the comm from the captured dreadnought, steady and professional. "All units, this is Taehyun, aboard the new Soul's Revenge. We've secured an enemy heavy cruiser and are engaging remaining hostile forces. Continue the attack. The tide of battle had turned completely. The humans had transformed a desperate last stand into a devastating counterattack, using their own destruction as a weapon against their enemies. They had taken their greatest weakness, being outnumbered and outgunned, turned it into their greatest strength. As Vextal watched the remaining pirate ships flee in terror, I finally understood what made humans truly dangerous. They didn't just fight, they transformed conflict itself. Every disadvantage became an advantage. Every weakness became a weapon. And every moment of desperation became an opportunity for victory. They weren't just warriors. They were evolution in action, adapting and changing faster than any enemy could respond. And that realization both thrilled and terrified him more than any battle he had ever fought. The silence after battle was more unsettling than the chaos that had come before. Vextal floated in the command center of his ship, watching the aftermath of the Battle of New Sol unfold through his viewports. Debris fields stretched as far as his sensors could reach, twisted metal, burning plasma, and the scattered remains of what had once been the largest pirate fleet in the sector. But it wasn't the destruction that amazed him. It was what happened next. Captain Tehine, who just hours ago had sacrificed his own flagship in a suicidal ramming attack, was now coordinating rescue operations from the captured enemy dreadnought. His voice carried across the communication channels with the same calm authority he had used to order the destruction of his enemies. Medical Team 7, I need you on the Dark Vengeance. We have wounded pirates in the lower decks who need immediate attention. Treat them the same as our own people. Vextal's optical sensors focused on the human captain's face. There was no trace of the primal fury that had transformed him during the battle. Instead, Taeon looked tired, concerned, and utterly human. Major Lee Minho limped past Vextal's viewport, his left arm now in a medical sling and his face pale from blood loss. But instead of heading to the medical bay, he was directing the rescue of enemy survivors from their escape pods. Vextal watched in amazement as Lee personally helped a wounded pirate into a medical transport, supporting the enemy soldiers. Wait, despite his own injuries? Easy there, Lee said gently to the pirate, who was clearly terrified. You're safe now. The doctors will take good care of you. Even more shocking was Sergeant Yu Jason, who had single-handedly cleared an entire enemy cruiser during the boarding action. The Marine was now sitting in the Inchin's mess hall, sharing his emergency rations with captured enemy soldiers. One of the pirates, a young alien who couldn't have been more than 20 standard years old, was crying softly. Hey, it's okay, Yu said quietly, handing the young pirate a cup of water. The fighting's over. You're going to be all right. The pirate looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. You killed my friends. Why are you helping me? Was quiet for a moment, then smiled sadly. 'Cause you're not my enemy anymore. You're just a kid who made some bad choices. Everyone deserves a second chance. Vextal couldn't understand what he was witnessing. These were the same humans who had fought with such savage creativity just hours ago. Same warriors who had turned their own destruction into weapons, who had improvised tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Yet now they were showing compassion to the very enemies they had defeated. I don't understand, Vextal said to Captain Tehan, as they stood together watching human medics treat friend and foe alike. How do you transition so quickly from warrior to healer? How do you go from wanting to destroy your enemies to wanting to save them? Tehan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes following a medical team as they carefully carried a wounded pirate to the surgical bay. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of deep understanding. Because that's what makes us human, Commander. We choose when to be monsters and when to be angels. The key is knowing which moment calls for which choice. He gestured toward the medical bay where human doctors were working frantically to save the life of an enemy captain. During the battle, they were trying to kill our families, our children. They were monsters who deserved to be destroyed. But now, they're just people who are hurt and scared and need help. Vextal observed the human medical teams for hours, taking detailed notes for his report. These weren't just random acts of kindness, they were systematic, organized efforts to preserve life with the same intensity the humans had brought to destroying it. Lieutenant. Commander Park So-young had converted her damaged destroyer into a makeshift hospital ship. The Soul Guardian, which had been used as a battering ram just hours ago, now served as a sanctuary for the wounded. Park personally oversaw the treatment of an enemy captain whose ship she had destroyed during the battle. "Why are you helping?" "Me," the pirate leader asked, his voice filled with confusion and pain. "I tried to kill you, destroyed your colony's outer defenses." Park looked down at him with eyes that held no anger, only sadness, because the war is over, and now we heal. That's what my people do. We fight when we must, but we heal when we can? The pirate captain stared at her in amazement. "I don't understand your species. You're the most terrifying warriors I've ever faced, yet you're also the most compassionate. How is that possible?" Park smiled gently as she adjusted his medical monitors. "Because we remember what we're fighting for. We don't fight because we love war, we fight because we love peace. And when the fighting is over, we work to build that peace." That night, Vextel sat in his quarters preparing his final report to the Galactic Council. His mandibles clicked softly as he struggled to find the right words to describe what he had witnessed. How could he explain the duality of human nature? How could he make the Council understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics, but their ability to transform themselves as the situation demanded? Recommendation. Immediate full alliance status for humanity, he began, then paused to choose his words carefully. Warning to all council members, never, under any circumstances, fight humanity on their terms. They do not simply wage war, they become war itself when necessary, then choose to become human again when the battle is won. He paused, remembering the sight of Captain Tehane's smile as he prepared to ram the enemy fleet, and then the same man's gentle voice as he coordinated. Medical aid for wounded enemies. Their greatest weapon is not their technology or their tactics, but their ability to transform themselves as the situation demands. They can become monsters when survival requires it, then become healers when compassion is needed. This psychological flexibility makes them both the most dangerous enemies and the most valuable allies in the galaxy. Vextel added a final note. Additional recommendation: request immediate transfer to permanent human fleet assignment. These beings have much to teach us about the nature of warfare, survival, and what it truly means to be a warrior. As he filed the report, Vextel looked out at the human fleet conducting rescue operations around New Sol. Tomorrow, these same people would return to their ordinary lives: farmers, engineers, teachers, parents. They would tend their gardens, teach their children, build their communities with the same intensity they had brought to warfare. But if threatened again, they would transform once more into something else entirely. Something that had carved its way across the galaxy not through conquest, but through the simple refusal to surrender combined with the wisdom to know when to fight and when to forgive. He had thought he knew battle before meeting humanity. Now he understood that he had only known the pale shadow of what warfare could become when necessity demanded it. The humans had not just won a battle, they had revealed the true meaning of adaptive warfare, showing that the greatest victories came not from following doctrine, but from the courage to abandon it. When survival demanded something more, as he watched the last of the rescued pirates being transferred to medical facilities, Vextel realized that humanity's greatest victory wasn't the destruction of the enemy fleet. It was their choice to save their enemies' lives once the battle was won. That choice, more than any weapon or tactic, would make them legends across the galaxy. The end.